Good evening, everyone. We are now in Second Kings chapter 19. We're carrying on from verse 20. When we left off yesterday in the beginning of verse 20, it is important for us to be very clear uh, that Hezekiah is now feeling very pressured. He's at a point where he cannot do anything anymore. He has done everything in his power as a king to negotiate with the king of Assyria. But now the king of Assyria is bent on conquering the final stages of Judah, particularly Jerusalem. And so we saw how Hezekiah had done everything in his power as a king. He had done everything right in the eyes of God. He has cleared all the Bama, all the private altars, and he has done and restored the Torah into the land. Now, he also have placed his entire confidence in Jehovah. And as he is now faced with a dire straits situation, whereby the army that he now has in Jerusalem is nothing in comparison to the armies of the king of Assyria. He has now been confronted with two things. One was an emissary from the king of Assyria mocking him and God. And then finally, a message sent to Hezekiah to give up. Don't depend on God. Don't listen to what people say that God is going to deliver him. And so he went to the temple, prayed to God, pleaded on the behalf of the nation, particularly Jerusalem, the final frontier for the king of Assyria to conquer. And then he engaged with the prophet Isaiah. Now, at this point in time, I want to refresh our minds. God is the focus. And Hezekiah is very loyal to God, pleads to God. We also find that God speaks to Isaiah. God doesn't speak to Hezekiah, and Isaiah will convey God's message to Hezekiah. And this is where we left off. It's important for us to realize this is the cycle, this is the order, this is the way that God works. The prophet is the one who listens to God, who understands what God wants, and then conveys God's intent to the king. We begin in verse 20 this way. And then Isaiah, the son of Amoz, sent word to Hezekiah, which essentially is this, where Isaiah is now going to inform Hezekiah what God has to say. And so it says this is what Jehovah, the Elohim of Israel, says. It says, because you have prayed to me about Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard you. Now, I guess we need to understand there is no word here as uh because it should be regarding. Should be regarding. God is delivering through Isaiah what Hezekiah had pleaded with God. And God is going to tell Hezekiah some very important things, and that's what we will spend some time to understand. Remember, Hezekiah is now at his wits' end. Nothing he can do to withstand the onslaught of the king of Assyria. And so in verse 21, this is the word that Jehovah has spoken against him. So we need to understand God is speaking against him, and him would be Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. In verse 21, it says, She, the virgin daughter of Zion, has shown contempt for you and mocked you. She, the daughter of Jerusalem, has shaken her head behind you. These are words that are to be told to Sennacherib. Why? It's because Jerusalem, if you take a look at this, Jerusalem, Zion, the daughter of Zion, she has never been conquered by anyone, and definitely not Sennacherib. And so this word you is all about Sennacherib. This is the hymn that's being discussed here. So God is informing Hezekiah that this is what Jerusalem is saying about you. She is not afraid of you. Now, obviously, in real terms, Jerusalem has nothing to fight against Sennacherib. So we continue in verse 22. Now, from verse 22, it is addressed to Sennacherib. Whom have you mocked and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and haughtily raised your eyes, but against the Holy One of Israel? This basically tells the king Sennacherib that what he is doing is against Jehovah, the true and living God. Verse 23. Through your messengers, Sennacherib messengers, you have mocked the Lord. Now, in this case, in verse 23, the Lord here is, you have mocked Adonai. Now, remember, in the Hebrew language, Adonai addresses God. Now, there is another word that's used to address a human, like a king, like a leader, and that would be Adoni. So Adoni, just a slight change in pronunciation of the last syllable. Adonai refers to God. Adoni refers to anyone but God. And so the mocking says this: You have said, with my many chariots, I went up to the heights of the mountains, to the remotest part of Lebanon, and I shall cut down its cedars, tall cedars, its choicest junipers. I entered its farthest resting place, its thickest forest. Bear in mind that Lebanon is full of trees. These are the hardwood that was shipped down to Solomon to help him build the temple. Lebanon is filled with hardwood. In verse 24, you said, I dug wells and drank foreign waters, meaning the soldiers came and they had to drink water. There's no more from the river. They dig wells, and with the soles of my feet, I dried up all the streams of Egypt. There are so many of them that when they step onto something that has water, it dries all the way up. Verse 25. Verse 25 addresses Sennacherib. God is speaking to Sennacherib. Have you not heard? This would be Sennacherib. Long ago, I, God, did it. From ancient times, I, God, planned it. Now I have brought it about that you would turn fortified cities into ruined heaps, reminding the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, that the fact that he is able to do all this is that God allowed him. So the power, the real power, is actually with God. If God did not allow him, he wouldn't have been able to do it. Verse 26. Therefore, because God allowed it, their inhabitants, the ones that you have come to conquer, were powerless. The first word here is they were short of strength. Powerless is short of hand, but hand refers to power. They were short of power, and then they were shattered and put to shame. Shattered literally means they were terrified, they were broken. And the last part here is that they were ashamed, and that would be correct. They were like the vegetation of the field and the green grass on housetops that is scorched before it has grown. It shows that the king had so much power. They can do so many things, and the inhabitants of those lands were unable to confront Sennacherib. Verse 27, it says, and I know, God knows, your means Sennacherib, when you sit down, when you go out, when you come in, and your rage is against me. What has happened in this reply from God to Isaiah, to Hezekiah, is that God is turning this entire situation from the king of Assyria that is against the king of Judah. God is making it as it is God who is against the king of Assyria, and that the king of Assyria is against God. And so the king of Judah is a representation of Jehovah, the living God. And that is how God is now painting the picture here. Why is this so? Is because the king of Judah very much leads and rules the people of God. And so if anyone goes against Judah, they go against God. Because of your raging against me, God, because of your complacency has come up to my ears. Now, this is not complacency. This is tumult. This is your noise of battle has come up to my ears. I will put my hook in your nose and my bridle in your lips. And then this is the prophecy. And I will turn you back by the way which you came. Now, this is important. This part here is a key encouragement to the king of Judah, Hezekiah. God says, regardless of what you see of the king of Assyria, God says, I will turn you, the king of Assyria, back to go home where you came from. These words should comfort Hezekiah. But obviously, when you trust in God, you have to trust in him because of what has happened in the past, not because of what you are seeing by your eyes at this point in time. In the eyes of Hezekiah, his future is doomed because the king of Assyria is so overpowering strong. Nothing Hezekiah can actually do. But God has said, I will turn you back. That's a promise. Verse 29. Now, in verse 29, God is addressing Hezekiah. And this shall be the sign for you. You notice God gives signs to the kings. This is Hezekiah. At the time of Achaz, in Isaiah chapter 7, God says, ask me a sign. I will give you a sign. And now Hezekiah, God gives him a sign. Remember, a sign is something that is visual, meaning you can actually see. If you can't see it, it is not a sign. The word sign is ut. Ut means something that you can visually see. Hebrew is a concrete language, and the words that is being communicated to King Hezekiah is also very concrete. It is not abstract. It is not something in the mind of the king. It is something that he can see. And so observe what God says as the sign. Just like the sign that was given to King Ahaz. The child will be born, and before the child can choose good over evil, the kings will be gone. And so here it says, you will eat this year what grows of itself. In the second year, what grows by itself. In the third year, harvest, plant vineyards, and eat their fruit. So understand what it means. This year, before the year is over, in this same year, you can eat. Now, this is important. In the Hebrew culture, eating and drinking is very important. And if you don't have the ability to eat, then you will die. And that means that there will be not enough food. What you plant, you cannot get at. And people will die from either famine or from the war where you are put in siege and there's no more food. Now, God is promising Hezekiah, you will eat. It's not that you hope to eat, but you definitely will get to eat this year, next year, and the following year. You can continue to enjoy the harvest. Basically, telling the king of Judah, starting this year, you don't have to worry about the king of Assyria. When he attacks you, it, it doesn't matter because God has promised you will get to eat this year. You will get to eat next year. And you get to eat the following year. Now, all these are promises given to Hezekiah. Furthermore, the survivors that are left of the house of Judah will again take root downward and bear fruit upward. Now, what does that mean? The survivors, the remnants, in verse 30, those who escape of the house of Judah, not any other houses, the house of Judah, those who are in this land, particularly those who have escaped the hand of the king of Assyria, managed to run away, they will come back and they will continue to exist in the land. Root downward means they will settle back down. Barefoot upward means there will be time for them to enjoy the success of life. These are all very Eastern type of imagery. Then God says, for out of Jerusalem will go a remnant and survivors out of Mount Zion. Understand, Jerusalem and Mount Zion is the same thing. A remnant is what is left. Survivors is the same. So we have an A and a B, both telling about the same thing. There will be survivors. The zeal of the Lord will perform this, meaning all these things will happen. So if you were King Hezekiah and you hear Isaiah conveys this message, the king of Judah will get to eat all these things. So either the king of Assyria will go home or the siege will not succeed. And God says, not only that, the people who manage to escape the, the conquering of the king of Assyria, they will come back and they will take root again. Notice? And then they will be there so much so that they will have children and they will be able to plant, and there will be remnant, there will be survivors out of Jerusalem. Right now, Hezekiah, if he looked out of the city walls, he can see from afar the army of the king of Assyria. There is a sense of dejection, that he feels that there is no more hope because the army of the king of Assyria is so overpowering. That is the picture now. That's why Hezekiah prays to God. You have to do something because without a divine salvation, there is nothing he can do. Verse 32 Verse 32 says, therefore, this is what Jehovah says about the king of Assyria. What did God says? He, the king of Assyria, will not come into this city, that's Jerusalem, nor shoot an arrow there, meaning they will not get to even start the war. And he will not come before it with a shield, nor heap up an assault ram against it. Now, the way that people fight in the old days, Jerusalem is on a hill. And on the hill, you find Jerusalem being walled in. As a walled in city, the only way to go up is to build a ram. And to build a ram, you have to put earth so that the people can run up and conquer the place. What did God actually say? He will not come into this city, meaning they will not be able to breach. They will not shoot an arrow there, meaning they would have gone away before a single arrow is shot. Verse 32 also says this: they will not come before it with a shield, meaning they cannot attack it, and they will not pour an assault ram against it, that they are not even at a point of engaging in battle. Now, this is a very important promise to Hezekiah, that all these things will be over before the king of Assyria even had shot an arrow. Now, if you were King Hezekiah, you would be wondering, how can this be so? And it's a very natural thing. The sign for Hezekiah is this: he will get to see, to eat all this year and next year and the following year, which means that God has promised you will not die. You will get to eat at least 3 years down the road. There will be survivors. Those that are outside who has escaped the king of Assyria will come back. And then the last one here is Jerusalem will be safe. How can it be? In verse 33, it continues from verse 32. And God says, by the way that he, Sennacherib, came by, the same way he will return. This is literally to say that he is not able to come near Jerusalem. He shall not come to this city, and that will be Jerusalem. The final words here that Isaiah says this: declares the Lord. This is a very important word. This is not say the Lord. This is a very intense speech. This is a declaration of God. If you like, a decree of God. God is making a formal statement that all these things will happen to the king of Assyria. Now, continuing on, God tells Hezekiah in verse 34, how is that ever so? And God says, and I will protect this city, Jerusalem, to save it for my own sake. Notice, King of Assyria fighting Judah is really fighting with God, and God will defend Jerusalem. And for my servant David's sake, this is in 2 Samuel chapter 7. God promised that there will always be the throne in Jerusalem for David and his descendants. But what was important is for whoever is there to be loyal to God, to do what is right for God. And Hezekiah has done everything that was right before God. Hezekiah is pronounced as one who has done what is yashar, and he has done what is uh, honorable to God, what is righteous. He has cleared all the Bama. He has put his entire batak, his confidence in God. And yet he is now facing this unnerving situation of impending doom. But God made the promise. I will protect for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And so there was a promise given to David, and God wants to protect his dignity and his reputation because the king is a loyal king. And therefore, the people will be spared. And as God allowed this to happen, it is also there to teach Hezekiah that while all is seemingly doomed, but because he did what was right, because he did what was right in the eyes of God, that even when in Hezekiah's eyes, he can't see a way out, but because he prays to God, he seeks Isaiah, and God spoke finally. He declares that the city will be saved. If we were there at that point in time, you find that there is Hezekiah, there's Isaiah, both in the city. And then you would find the army of the king of Assyria. Now we at this point in time we are just told that they are lots and lots of soldiers. Given the fact that Rav was trying to mock the king, even if I gave you 2,000 horses, you won't be able to find 2,000 horsemen. And here, Rav Shakeh says, you just give up. Don't listen to anyone saying that God is going to deliver you. He's not. God is going to give your city into the hands of the king of Assyria. And so Hezekiah prayed. God speaks to Isaiah. Isaiah now tells Hezekiah, I will protect you. So God is coming into the picture. We now read the final passages of this chapter, chapter 19, reading from verse 35. In verse 35, this word then is and then. That very night, now that night means the night that Isaiah sent message to King Hezekiah. That very night, and then we read this, the angel of the Lord. Remember this word, the angel of the Lord is Malak Jehovah, sent by God himself to represent God, to demonstrate his power, that he will defend and protect the city. Verse 34. God says, I will protect the city. And so this angel of the Lord, that God sent this angel, very powerful angel, to represent God, to fulfill his word, I will protect the city. We need to understand Malak means someone who represents a person who sends him. And so Malak Jehovah means Jehovah sends the angel called a messenger, and this messenger, the angel, represents Jehovah to protect the city. And so we read that he came out, and then the next word here is, and then he struck 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians are nearby. They haven't even started to plot a siege. They haven't even started to want to fight. They are gathering, they are about to do something. And that night, God says, I will protect the city. Now, this 185,000 could be a 185,000 strong army. Some had said that this was 185,000 generals. That would be way, way, way too many people. But perhaps this 185 may not be such an exact number, but to let us know that this would be an extremely large number. Obviously, 185,000 versus 2,000 in Jerusalem would be a very lopsided battle. And when we read about the Malach Jehovah, the angel of the Lord, going out to strike 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians, how did they know? It says that when they got up early in the morning, behold, all the 185,000 were dead. Now, perhaps this 185,000 is a symbolic number, not something that is so round figure, just a very large number. Verse 36. And then, this is and then, after Sennacherib found 185,000 dead, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed. This word is to moved out. Moved out without a fight. Remember, God says there won't be an arrow shot. There won't be a shield come after you. They won't come into the city. They won't even build a ram. And so what we have seen is when this happened, they were only about to stage an attack on Jerusalem. They weren't even ready to do that. And the battle was over. Overnight, everyone died. Well, almost everyone died. And so Sennacherib moved out, and then he says they returned home and went back to live in Nineveh. Now, what did what did the king of Assyria actually see? The king of Assyria actually saw this corpses, corpses dead everywhere. I guess when you think of it, if you have such a large number of dead bodies, it would really scare you. This is the bulk of his army. Huge army. I would think that it's huge army. And suddenly the bulk of it died. And so Sennacherib left. He didn't go home alone. I am of the opinion he went back with the remnant. Not everyone died. And so when he was struck with this event, Sennacherib understood there is no way that he can pursue this battle. Why? Earlier on in this chapter, he had sent Rabshakeh to mock God. You know, all the lands that he had gone to conquer, they are gone to nothing. And so your God is nothing too, Hezekiah. Now that he woke up and he saw all his huge army all lying down on the ground, corpses dead, he suddenly realized that the king of Judah serves a living God. The king of Judah is certainly going to die anyways. Hezekiah knew it, Sennacherib knew it, but God had other ideas. The king of Assyria realized he can't fight the God of Judah. The king of Assyria realizes that the God of Judah is alive and real. And how did he know? God didn't leave a calling card. God didn't leave a prophetic message. God didn't leave any vision for him. All the king of Assyria saw was that his entire 185,000 strong army that is about to crush Jerusalem is gone. And that is the backbone of his army. And without that, he has nothing to fight with. Not the king of the African country who is coming to face him, the king of Cush. And so Sennacherib went home to Nineveh. Now, with this, we can see that God protects his city, protects those who are loyal to him, protected the city of Jerusalem, enabled his words to be true. And so, in order to protect the word of God to be honorable, God himself came to do the work by sending an angel, a malach. And with one malach, he protected the city, destroyed 185,000 of the strongest army personnel, all dead before Sennacherib, so that Sennacherib is now proven true. He will have to go home to where he came from. All in all, Hezekiah will be able to eat the fruits this year, next year, and the year following. Now, in verse 37, our final verse. And then, remember, yesterday we read the prophecy that Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, will die by the sword. And so it came about as he was worshiping. Now, this word worshiping does not exist in the Hebrew language. This word is not worship, although you find this word used a lot. This word here is caused himself to prostrate. Now, how does that work? It means that if there was a statue, let's say this was a statue of the god of the Assyrian, then we would find that the king would be lying on the ground, hands on the floor. And this is prostrating face to the ground. This is an Eastern way of expressing homage and expressing humility towards someone who's greater. And in this case, his Elohim. That is his Elohim. We find that his Elohim is in the house of uh, Nisroch, his Elohim, right? Nisroch, his Elohim. And that Adramelech and Shar Etzer, these are his uh, assassinators, if you want to call it. It says here, they killed him with the sword. Now, the actual words here is to strike him. Strike him to kill him with the sword, just as God said so. Now, all these words are very important because the fulfillment of God's prophecy is accurate. It is not killed by something falling on the king. God says he will be killed by the sword, and he will be killed by the sword, and he was killed by the sword. He wasn't killed because he fell down the flight of stairs. And so these two guys escaped to the land of Ararat. Now, the land of Ararat, likely so, it would be the west of Assyria. And it is likely in today's Turkey, the eastern part of Turkey. Now, in closing, we read this. And his son, Esar Hadon, became king in his place, and that would be the end of the king of Assyria, Sennacherib. Why was it important that he died? One, he mocked God. He could mock anyone, but he mocked God, the Holy One of Israel. And blasphemy of God, obviously, is death by Mosaic law. And in this case, yeah, the king of Assyria is not an Israelite, is not someone from the house of Judah. Does it apply to him? Obviously, it did. Because God is a living God, and anyone who blasphemes against him, like in this case, to want to destroy the city, want to destroy the loyal king, want to wipe out the name of God, mocking God, and remove the throne of David, God has something to do. And so, because he mocked God with this intent of removing everything that God had promised to David, God then took action because Hezekiah was a loyal, faithful, straight, honorable, righteous king. Now, if Hezekiah wasn't the case, would God have defended Jerusalem? Well, if you take a leaf of the story from Akkad, the answer was also yes. Yes, because Akkad is the first of the generation uh, after the loyal king whom God had in Joram. Unfortunately, Joram being a loyal king, his son uh, here in Akkad wasn't loyal. But the son of Akkad, Hezekiah, was loyal. And so God has no reason to give up on Jerusalem as yet. Now we find that God gave up on Jerusalem in the subsequent generations of kings after Josiah. A little further down the road, all his descendants, four of them, uh, would have lost the plot. They would have defied God. They would have done everything God didn't want. And yes, in the third and fourth generation, God came to visit them by the hands of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, with this, we come to the end of our session today.